Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for joining. I can see some familiar faces, which is always nice when you're doing this kind of thing. If we haven't met before, it's really nice to be presenting to you today. With a slight apology, my colleague Zara is unavoidably detained at the moment. However, we're part of the same organisation, and what I'm going to take you through as part of this session today is our take on sort of change agility from an individual, a team, and an organisational perspective. We are obviously we're a distributor for Facet 5 in the UK, and we have been for many years. We also are a consultancy. So what I'm going to be sharing is our latest view on this topic. But what I thought would be really interesting to put in the mix today is when we're talking about change agility within organizations, um, what are the qualities and the capabilities we're actually interested in as far as the people within that organization are concerned. So I'm going to give you our take on organizational change agility through our research, our conversations with our many clients, and also looking at sort of desk research and information. And I'm going to overlay it with some suggestions as to what we might look for when we're looking for people's natural characteristics and tendencies, obviously thinking in the main about their traits and their factor scores. So why are we doing this? We know since the pandemic and moving forward, organizations need to continually evolve. This is research that we've been speaking to our clients about for quite a while now, and it's our main position around the idea of constant of continually evolving as if to stay relevant, because change is difficult. And if you think about the context within which organizations are operating, the financial, the social, the geographical, and even the environmental context, all of this puts huge pressure on organizations to stay relevant. So we coined the term rapid evolution. Rapid evolution actually exists in biology. We did talk about this last year, but we're taking it to our clients now. Rapid evolution allows species to adapt very rapidly to their environment, and in the same way, we can use the similar terminology to talk about organisations. So we've looked at literature, we've looked at academic research, and we've had conversations with our clients to understand what they think they will need in order to keep ahead of the curve. So this is the key concept that we are concerned with. Um, so the idea of a growth stall in an organization. So in other words, an organization that experiences some kind of rapid growth for a while, and then all of a sudden something happens to really kind of impede and suddenly make that much harder. The example that my colleague uses is Peloton, who obviously boomed during the pandemic because people needed to keep exercising and they did so at home. To the idea that having to look at your product proposition, your offering, and to be able to adapt to the fact that everyone's going back to work again. So we need to think about how do we adapt our business in order to cope with that change, which is pretty sudden in those terms. There's an example there of a growth store where suddenly you kind of hit this brick wall and you need to do something quite quickly. What we're interested in is the growth associated with the diagram you can see bottom right there. So in other words, we need to rapidly evolve. We need to have a look at what it is we do, and in some way, we need to be able to turn on a sixpence. We need to be able to suddenly change course, and thinking about the qualities that organizations need enable to be able to do that. We've come up with what we call key tensions and key principles. So the principles of rapid evolution that you can see here are that change becomes who you are and what you do. Anybody who's been out there who's been involved in any kind of change leadership or change programs where people are concerned is that you'll be familiar with the idea that change is a constant. So change becomes who you are and what you do, and we have to think big, but we have to act of organizations who start to think in agile terms, in terms of failing fast, where you need to get something out quickly, and you're relying less on your perfectionist tendencies and more on your tendencies to be able to take something to market very quickly to a small confined group of people and then bring it back. The third principle there about fast, slow, we have to know when we need to push forward and when reflection is required. And you'll see that in some of these tensions that we'll be exploring. Less is more. And then finally, the idea that tension creates energy for change. If you look around in looking around the world, tension is something which is present in all kinds of different dimensions and elements. So if you think about a suspension bridge, for example, it's held up on the basis of tension. So tension creates energy. Energy can either be harnessed to the positive or to the negative, and it's about how do we harness tension and able to create energy for change. So these are our key principles, and from that we come up with what we call five tensions. Now, this is the bit that I'm going to start to open up a conversation about with you around these five key areas. Tensions around organizational behavior, which can put an organization into the best possible position in order to buck the trend and to sort of push against the forces that are acting on it. So you can see these sort of summarized here. As you look at these, have a think about where you've noticed these, perhaps in your own organization, but also clients that you're familiar with, and clients that you work closely with day to day, because we notice this in lots of ours. We're all dealing with really strong forces globally on a day-to-day basis. So these are our five tensions. To bring this back to facet 5, what I've done is I will take you through each of these key areas, these 5 key areas, and then I've put a suggestion in as to what we might be looking for, either within an individual, within a team, or within an organization, enables or limits that. Now, there's great conversations here around what are we prioritizing within our skill sets and our behaviors. So as you listen to the breakdown that I'm going to go through, feel free to put any questions that you like into chat. I've asked Nicola to play back any questions that we get, and I'll also take a look myself. But thinking about what your view is on how we're viewing, how does somebody's profile, how does an organization's tendency sit within all of these? So our first tension is the idea around being sure of where you want to get to, fixing your vision. We like clarity. We're human beings. We tend to rely on a little bit of predictability because of our biology and because of our preferences. Some are wedded to that more than others. Some people, people are generally like to know where they're heading. If you look at any kind of objective setting process, if you look at any organizational strategy, you can't decide how you're going to get somewhere unless you know where you're going. So whether you're calling it a North Star or, a mission or a vision, is being really crystal clear on that is our first priority. And then our tension is on deciding how we're going to get there. We use constantly the acronym VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. In that environment, we simply have to be able to flex how we get there. And then if you're not thinking about this already, thinking about the kinds of characteristics that sit within an organization that allow it to be able to manage these tensions. So there's a couple of questions that you think about from a leadership perspective. How clear are you on what the future looks like? How well have you envisioned this for your teams? And how motivated are people by the vision to make it a reality? Leaders' role is to set direction is to tell people where not tell people necessarily, but engage people in where the organization is going. So fixing the vision becomes a vital part of the makeup of not only the leadership, but the individuals within the team. And then the second part around flexing the journey, are we sufficiently responsive enough to to the changing landscape? If you think about it as any kind of journey, you could be on land, sea, on air, or in the air at any point. Each of those require different qualities. So, what are the assumptions that we're making about the road ahead, whether it is a road or whether it isn't? So, these two qualities become really, really important in looking in balancing. I've gone simply here to the idea of the two key factors that I think kind of dominate this conversation are will and control. And you could look at this at any level. So we might look at this at an individual level. We might be coaching a leader who has really, really high will. Will describing how firmly we stick to our goals versus how flexible we are. If I'm high will, I'm going to be very decisive, very assertive, and very tenacious in being and sticking to the goals that I've set as an individual. If I'm as part of a team, there may be more confrontation, but again, there will be a really clear, people will have clear view about fixing that vision and keeping the goal in mind. Now, what I find really interesting here is that the degree of control we prefer or we demonstrate within our individual, team, or organizational preference is really crucial here, because if we're all looking at high control as a predominant characteristic, control will generally probably have the preference that there is one way to get there, or that there's a right way to get there, or that the way to get there is structured, and we set it at the start, and this is what we stick to. We know that individuals with high control are excellent at setting a plan and sticking to it, and about being very clear about that plan. Now, the challenge here is if the plan changes. Any of you who experience this yourself or work with individuals and teams that struggle to be able to flip and be agile will know that control plays a part in this. We have to be able to be flexible and adaptable, which is where the advantages of lower control come in. So with any individual, when you're talking about fixing the vision and flexing the journey, yes, they can be really clear about where they're getting to, but have they chosen to get there, and how, let's say, able are they to flex and adapt? So I think the two key qualities that we are most interested in here are, to what degree does the individual, team, or organization demonstrate the qualities associated with high will, versus what is their orientation to achieving that? How structured or flexible do they appear to be in terms of control? I'm just going to pause there and see if anyone has any observations or thoughts on that. If not, I will move on to the second tension, but do feel free to chime in. I think what's really interesting here is that as we were going through this, you can make a case for quite a lot of the behaviors supported by a number of factors. But what I've tended to refer to here is what I think the most important focus should be. So tension one, fix the vision, flex the journey. Okay, so we go into some quite interesting language here. Our second tension is the degree to which an organization can be self-questioning. So in other words, how closely does an organization look at its priorities and question them? We call it productive paranoia. In other words, we're looking inward, we're being critical, but we're looking at ourselves thinking, can we do this better? How do we improve this? Because complacence, particularly when you think about the organizations that become very successful, complacence can become the enemy. So that productive paranoia is an extremely important part of us being able to look in a mirror as an organization and decide what it is that we perhaps need to change up or do differently. The tension there is against pursuing and being sort of convicted and committed to what it is you believe you need to do. So we call that courageous conviction. You have a high level of conviction in what you believe the organization is there to do, and you pursue it. These naturally fight against each other. And so if we're talking about leadership behavior, to what extent are your leaders focused on what's going on internally versus externally? Our productive paranoia has to involve an element of horizon scanning, an element of us looking ahead and thinking about where are our strengths and what challenges are we likely to come into. So again, you can start to think about what the qualities within the profile that kind of promote that kind of behavior. Are they noticing changes in the internal and external environment early enough? Is my radar scanning? Have I got that awareness of what's coming up? I think you'll probably all know what's coming in terms of traits and factors. Courageous conviction. Are leaders clear on and are they committed to the priorities that they're pursuing? So again, it's a balance. You need to be confident and committed, but also you need to be able to look in the mirror and say, okay, are we doing this right? And are we inspiring teams to commit to pursuing these opportunities? Again, the leader's role there. So moving these into the thinking about the space of factors, as you probably suspected, I think emotionality plays a strong part with productive paranoia. Excuse me a sec. We know that the strong qualities associated with high emotionality are vigilance and perceptiveness, among other things. Not just those, but the ability to be self-critical and to want to improve. That's a really, really important element of any organization. If we're talking about leadership authenticity, for example, being able to admit when you're wrong or admit when something isn't quite what it should be and being willing to change it. I think that's really, really a key quality that organizations need to flex and adapt to. If you can imagine an organization that is comprised entirely or predominantly of lower emotionality, there might just be a little bit of complacence creeping in there. Yes, things will appear confident and possibly optimistic, but are they falsely optimistic? So I think this is a really, really important element of this second tension. In association with emotionality, the work that I do with teams and individuals, I often find that those with the lower energy scores are the ones thinking it through. We know that as a preference. So if I have high emotionality and low energy, I'm going to be really, really focused on what's going on here, and I'm going to be thoughtful. Probably less keen to share it, so that we need to put a process in there that gets the views from these people. But the lower energy will make us very go into ourselves and think about that. So we need to balance the self-doubt that can come out of that. But in terms of looking inwards, organizations that have processes which capture this reflection and this natural caution people have can be useful. And then on the courageous conviction side, these may exist in one individual, but it's about how does that individual balance those? And this is why we call them tensions. I might be really reflective and think really deeply about how I'm doing something or how we're performing. But in terms of my conviction, if I've got strong beliefs and I've got that high affection, think of the idealist profile, really strong beliefs and principles, I'm totally committed to what I believe. And I'm tenacious and goal oriented. I have high will there. There's a natural potential there for that to exist in one individual. So this isn't definitive, but these are the when I was talking this through, these were the qualities that were most prevalent in the discussion that we were having around the second tension. Again, feel free to put in a question or anything on chat, but just to break up the explanations I'm giving. But hopefully there you can see, again, at a team level, how good are a team at doing this? How can a team remain committed to what they're doing, but also self-reflective at the same time? And how do we nurture both of those? Okay. So our next, and you can see the example there from Jeff Bezos, but our next tension sits between fearless experimentation and sharp decisions. So, in other words, you can see there, think big, act soon, start small and learn fast. Being able to be comfortable with doing something new or doing something differently, but also at the same time being able to make decisions that are sharp and quick. I mentioned earlier this idea of failing fast. I think this is a really important element of it, and avoiding decision-making biases which push against that. So the status quo bias there, preference for avoiding change in order to maintain current. We know that will be a preference in some profiles. Risk aversion and sunk cost fallacy. So the idea that we've got halfway, we might as well finish now. There's a really common false perception that people can have of how let's say a project that isn't going to plan. The sunk cost fallacy gives us a false impression of progress we've made versus progress we could make. So that's an example of another decision-making bias. We need to play against these. And so when you're talking about fearless experimentation versus sharp decisions, think about these three questions. In which areas should we be taking more risk, testing out new, more radical ideas? So notice as in which areas there. Where are we looking in our organization for the new big ideas? Where is the fearless experimentation in what we do? We know that we need to keep some things constant, but where are the opportunities within the organization to do something a bit different, a bit radical? Lots of organizations now focus on, particularly engineering organizations, focus on particular pockets of their organization that have the opportunity to try something out within what they call a sandbox or something like that, where you can actually try something with a discrete audience, get their feedback and work it through. Second question, what are we hanging on to that we need to let go of in order to move forwards? Again, it's a slightly different sense to the first question, but conservatism, doing things in the same way, will breed it will make this question quite a difficult one to answer and consider. What do we need to let go of in order to move forward? So being able to be fearless and saying, moving off with the old and moving on with new ideas. So I think that's another key question for leadership there. And finally, what biases are making our decision making less effective? I've done a lot of work recently in the legal profession, looking at cognitive diversity. And we've been using Facet 5 to demonstrate the different ways in which people will approach problems and solutions. Biases in things like in areas such as cognitive, when you're thinking about cognitive diversity, this plays a really, really strong role. So 3 examples there of where these tensions could play out by asking questions. So in terms of when we're looking at a profile, who are the fearless experimenters? Who are the people that will try something new and be kind of up for a change? And obviously a couple of examples there that make us think about this. If I have the combination of low control and high affection, I'm probably somebody, or I'm likely to be somebody who has a tendency or characteristically I'll enjoy opportunities and new things, because we know that the lower control tendencies are to challenge the way things are done. I'm low control myself, and I enjoy finding new ways of doing things. Sometimes to amuse myself, sometimes to effect an improvement. It could be for whatever reason the motivation is there, but it's different. But the lower control can make us really interested in, what could this look like? Let's do it differently. Let's not use the preset rules and instructions, and let's work out a different way. But if you combine that with high affection, you actually get a myriad of opportunities, because we know that affection is linked to openness and curiosity in people and ideas, and we know from Teamscape that high affection teams create psychological safety with each other. This becomes really important when you're experimenting. You don't want to advocate experimenting if people feel that they're going to get fired if it goes wrong. You need to create a psychologically safe environment. And so the factor and the characteristics that most closely link to that are higher affection. So obviously most of us on this call are aware that flexibility is important when you're talking about people's factors and factor scores. But if you have a predominance of high affection, it's really quite important to think about what biases will that create in the team in terms of its ability to experiment and be fearless in that experimentation. I think there's also something in there about emotionality. So talking about how those exist within fearless experimentation is quite important. And then we're thinking about sharp decisions. How do you make sharp decisions? I'm not too sure I'm good at that. I could see, Zara, you've managed to solve your
Can you hear
technical
me?
problems. Yeah,
Oh
yeah,
my goodness.
I can hear you.
Huge
Um,
apologies. I'm not sure whether to just let you carry on.
it's okay. I might bring you in on the conversation around
Yeah.
sharp decisions, actually.
Yeah.
Um, I need to introduce my colleague, Zara Whysall, who's our director of research. Has had really, really terrible technical problems, so we didn't want to hold you up any further. But I'm really pleased you can join, and maybe we can have this conversation around
Mm.
sharp decisions. So we're talking about making decisions in such a way, and what the factor score, the factor or characteristics that might perhaps facilitate that a little bit. And lower emotionality creates people that give their confident and unworried impression. And I think to make sharp decisions, there needs to be an element of abandon involved. We talked about this yesterday, didn't we?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Not worrying about, it's that loss aversion thing, trying to not be influenced too much by your emotions in your decision making. So, yeah, being able to separate, emotions from the situation or legacy issues or, all of those things is really important.
So some abandon, and then combined with again with higher will. I mentioned higher will earlier. It was interesting that higher will came up in quite a lot of our conversations.
Mm.
Determination and decisiveness. That kind of almost fearlessness that people have when they have very high will in being able to decide what they're going to do and when they're going to do it. It's a really important element of sharp decision making.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely. Again, largely, the interesting thing is the fact that that might mitigate um, status quo biases that we all have. So, if left to our own biases, then the decision would be let's not change, let's not do something different. Whereas that strong will might overcome the bias to just, keep things as they are.
Absolutely, and I think talking about that status quo bias, we've got another potential challenge creeping in there around control as well. So if someone is, if you have a high control organization, it will do things in a specific way, or it will prefer to do things in a specific way, and you might see a tendency within leadership to keep things as they are, and that plays against what we're trying to achieve with this tension. So I'm asking for comments as we go, Zara, but I think if we move on to tension 4, talk to us a little bit about this.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting one. So you've got enlightened empathy on the one hand, which is really deeply understanding your stakeholders, whether that's your employees or your customers. So having that deep understanding, so being curious, asking questions, seeking to understand before jumping in. So to some extent that might lead to evidence-based decision making, so making your decisions based on what data or information you've got about your audiences. But that is in tension with this concept of leap of faith. So it's more if if a leader wants to try and do something different, get ahead of the curve, then there won't be data necessarily about how might people respond in this situation because we haven't encountered it before, or what might customers think about this new product where they don't know yet because they haven't encountered it. So it's bringing in that little bit of creativity. And when we think about managing people, that might be giving somebody a stretch opportunity. We haven't seen them perform in this environment before or in this scenario, but I'm going to just trust my intuition and take that leap of faith. So it could be with taking a risk on an employee, or it could be a new product or offer or way of doing things. So yeah, hopefully that explains the kind of two tensions in terms of that. And they're the sorts of questions that we'd ask leaders, aren't they, to try and help them think about how they're currently operating on this tension. So, do you really understand your audiences? When's really the last time that you spent a day in the shoes of, any key stakeholder, whether that's your team members or frontline employees in your organization or customers? So that's that first one. And then, other questions around, well, where are the opportunities to take a leap of faith, to encourage others to take a leap of faith, to do something they haven't done before, or being creative, putting something out there that is a bit different to what we've seen in the past, and trusting your intuition rather than what the evidence is necessarily telling you. So yeah, some interesting things there. And what are your reflections in terms of personalities influence on that?
Well, when we were looking at this yesterday, this one's really interesting because what does it mean to have empathy? I mean, we know that when we look at somebody's profile, there are things that you can perhaps understand, or little cues that you can get around how interested in others someone is going to be, and we know that affection it really supports that. So putting others first, willing to believe, we know are characteristics of higher affection. So the suggestion there is that if you've got a high affection team or a high affection organization, you will have one that probably listens to its people, hopefully in order to understand their position. So if you combine that with having a lower will, so we've talked about high will quite a lot, and I think one of the dangers when you're doing this kind of work is that you can start to talk about ideals, but lower will in this case puts the onus on, it takes the spotlight away from your own views and opinions, and it's actually okay. So what do people think? How are people feeling, and what's their view? So lower will and high affection, I think, is a potentially useful combination when you want to have enlightened empathy, when you want to listen to your customers. You don't want to bombard them with your views. This is what I think you should do. You've got your list on, and we know that people with lower will are quite often better listeners than often with people with higher will who give their views a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's what I think on that one.
Yeah, not wanting to force your own agenda onto a situation, just being open to seeking to understand before launching in with your own, agenda or issues that you want to try to push. And tell us a bit more about what, on the other side to that. So that leap of faith, that have, what have we got there?
I'm reminded of the quite a few years ago, Richard Branson wrote a book called "Screw It, Let's Do It." And that's what I think of when I see leap of faith. What's making up that kind of psyche? And again, I've gone with. I was thinking about the emotionality factor. You're making a leap, and there's some element of fear involved there, or as an implication that there's something dangerous happening. And I think lower emotionality will give you that confidence and optimism.
Mm,
So maybe you need to think about who your more confident, optimistic people are when you're needing to do this, because they're the ones that will make you feel like it's okay and then it's all right to
mm,
do it. Let's
mm,
go.
yeah.
And then naturally, if you team that up with people who are action oriented, higher energy, so risking impulsiveness, but spontaneity is what we're looking for. A leap of faith.
Mm,
Let's not think about it too much. Let's
mm,
over we go. So that's where my mind went when thinking about
yeah.
this, because
Yeah.
and to what degree could you harness that within a team or across an organization? So I think this is a really this is really, really important as well.
Yeah, and you
Um,
see it a lot in teams, don't you? So, and especially in the environments people are having to operate in at the moment. So, having to be able to act when we don't have all of the information, it's a real, common challenge these days. If you wait until you really understand that empathy piece, if you need to wait until I really need to understand how this is going to land with people before you act, then sometimes it's too late. And so, in a fast-paced environment, then sometimes you do have to take the leap of faith more often. I'm going to have to do something here, even though I'm not entirely sure, haven't got all of the information, or perhaps haven't
yeah,
consulted as deeply as I wanted to. So it's that tricky balance, isn't it?
and we also know that thinking about the two factors I've referenced here, we know that higher emotionality will create more apprehension, and we know that caution comes out of that. And I can certainly relate to sometimes being paralyzed through,
Mm,
not through fear, but through being wary about doing something.
mm,
And when you're talking about making a leap of faith, that could be a barrier or a blocker to that.
definitely.
So
Yeah.
I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Um,
So,
should we move on to the fifth one?
yeah.
I love a
Yeah.
Swiss
So,
Army knife.
yeah, really important one here. So it's about having that strength in diversity, of every type of diversity. So obviously, this is kind of comes back to, in a VUCA environment where you don't really know what's going to come down the tracks, what challenges might we need to face in a few months or years' time. Having that diversity in the Swiss Army knife analogy is really useful when you don't know what we might have to face, because we've got that broad range of stuff in our toolkit, of people, of diversity of thought, of all of those things. So we'll be able to handle kind of whatever's thrown at us. So it's that, but making sure also that we're, obviously using people's unique skills and preferences and background and ways of looking at situations. But it's making sure on the other side that we do have alignment in the key places where it matters to be able to move forwards, at pace. So that unified alignment. And I like the murmuration analogy, because it's, there's some difference, but they're in harmony. And yes, you might have some, birds on the edge doing something a little bit different, slightly over there, and that's fine. But so long as, overall, we're moving in harmony, then that's, that's great. So it's that tension. Yeah.
And then what do leaders need to be thinking about then here, do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, the classic stuff that I'm sure many people that we bring out often when we're, talking to teams about their team facet profile. So, are you actually, how different are you in terms of your approach to a situation, and are you using that? Are you leveraging it? Are you leveraging the difference, or are we trying to get people to fit to what we think is the best way of doing things, or cultural fit? So it's that, to what extent are you diverse, and to what extent are you leveraging that? And then, in terms of that alignment piece, if we had to really focus down on some core things, are we all aligned about what those core things are? So if we went, I think it's interesting to go out into an organization and ask people, what are the main priorities? What are the things at the heart of our organization that really matter? Are we aligned around those? And see what the answers are. And that would kind of be the difference of how tight or diverse their murmuration would be. If you've got people who see
Yeah.
these things as our core priorities or core principles even, and others who see it differently, then that can be an issue and can certainly slow you down because you're not moving smoothly, you know, and aligned.
No, absolutely. And I think for this particular tension, where I wanted to focus my comments on how do we use the various Facet 5 products in order to consider what these look like. So, I mean, diverse communities. Um, I, I've been speaking to one or two clients recently about using Audition, and what's really interesting about Audition is that it forces your hand when you're making the decision around do we find someone who uh, will fit what we believe our culture is, or do we want somebody who will add to it? And I think there's a tension there. Is are we looking for cultural fit or cultural add?
Mm.
And Audition helps clients really think hard about that. I was on a call this morning with a client who wants to look for a senior role using it, and the question is around how much do you want somebody who is going to um, fit in with how you view a successful person in that role,
Mm.
or are you prepared to take a risk and take somebody who's going to come at it from a different angle? And that's a really interesting question to ask when we're talking about how cognitively diverse are people,
Mm.
because we all know the biases around hiring and we all know the biases around selection. So thinking about the ways in which we can use Facet 5 to to think around cognitive diversity, like I said earlier, using personality as a cognitive diversity measure is a really, really great way to look at it. I've just put these up here for the sake of illustration, but you can look at there's an organizational analysis on the left-hand side there, where you're looking at diversity. You're looking at distribution of factor scores across larger populations. We have TeamScape centrally, where you can look at smaller groups, and then obviously at the individual level you can talk about you can coach a leader on all five of these tensions based upon the type of information that we've been talking about. But I think specifically around cognitive diversity, this is it's a newer idea, and it's very powerful.
Mm.
um, so
And how, when you're looking at a profile, when you've got that data across an organization, you're looking at the collective facet profiles, how widely or narrowly distributed do you tend to find the profiles? You know,
it's
do they have a range?
yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, the more people you have in a sample, the more normally distributed it will appear. But we did a piece of work recently with a particular segment of I guess it's finance sector, looking at a specific role, and we were looking at the differences between I think it was lawyers, because we're owned by a legal group, so lawyers is quite features heavily in kind of some of the preferences that we encounter internally. Lawyers, bankers, and accountants, I think, and there were some subtle differences of significance. We did some statistical analysis on it. There were some subtle but significant differences in the distribution of some of the sub-factor scores. The most interesting one was that lawyers were higher emotionality, quite
Okay.
significantly, which was interesting because of that wariness and that caution. And also perfectionism as well. You see
Mm.
a lot of perfectionism in the legal profession, because, as somebody said to me in a session I was running, it's indoctrinated to you from day one that it's about the letter of the law, it's about detail. So
Mm.
um, you can see, obviously, there's a lot of normally distributed information, but it's really interesting to look at the ones that are skewed either positively or negatively. Another way
Mm.
that you can use the data, because it is about data, and we're preaching to the choir with this on this call, I hope, but where you're talking about the strength of this approach. You're talking about norm groups and data reference, which is a much tougher. It's much tougher to argue against that when you're talking about the significance in the groups.
Yeah,
So
and I think the concept of rapid evolution and growth, where an organisation's at in terms of growth, is another interesting question to ask when looking at profiles of a team or an organisation, because obviously you can look at that in terms of functional differences, and you might expect to see differences, right, in the personality profiles according to the accountants in a company versus the creatives versus because that might have been something that they've consciously tried to do through recruitment. But then I think if you ask that question about, well, what does the organization need collectively due to the stage of growth that they're at, that's another interesting question. If you've got lots of highly cautious individuals and yet you want to go into a rapid growth phase of your development, then it's useful to know that, well, that could be a problem. There'll be lots of people not wanting to run fast towards this uncertain future if you've got particular profiles. I think helping organizations to think about that in terms of the suitability of your profiles given where you're at in your growth cycle is an interesting one as well.
Absolutely. I mean, piece of work I recently did with a senior exec team around transformation really helped them to understand what their preferences were in terms of what you're saying. How likely are we to run at this versus be cautious, and it really helped them understand how they're going to come across to their organization and to their people, and how to be aware of the blind spots that they had as well.
Yeah, and how much we really are going to need to support people through this, and perhaps even have a reality check on the pace that you think you might be able to introduce change, because if you've got a load of cautious individuals, then that's going to be a bit of a clash. So I think it's very useful in change management to look at profiles like these. I wonder if people have used it in that way. Can you see the chat? I don't touch anything in case I lose this, but any questions from people or comments?
Let's see if anyone wants to make any comment or ask any questions. Don't be shy.
Oh, I've dared to move the screen. I can now see people. Hello. What resonated with you in terms of what we've been discussing, in terms of those tensions and the way that you see personality playing?
I'm going to flick this back, hopefully helpfully, so that that's interesting. There we go. I'm going to go back to that. Just to remind everyone where we've been. But if you have any thoughts, happy to discuss.
Nice to see
I might, as opposed to typing, I could be there all day making opinions. One, thank you. I think it's really interesting work and really insightful work that you've done, and I think it all, as Rinka's saying, it all does resonate. I think the opportunity is how we help the individual understand their whole approach to that model, as opposed to saying there's particularly one person or one aspect of somebody's personality that will drive that. I do agree. I mean, I think there are aspects where somebody will find that a bit easier, more effortless, probably a bit more do that in a bit more of a flow. But I don't think we've always got the diversity in a team, unfortunately, that we always find that. So it's about how do you then help people understand how they can stretch into those styles, do it. And I suppose my rambling question is, do you think that people have initially the capability, and it's a skill-based and mindset thing, in order to adopt that model or to think in the way that organizations need to go? Because I think when we help people understand themselves, then we've got a great opportunity for them to be able to flex into those tensions more knowingly and more deliberately.
We were Zara and I we were talking about this because we were talking about these as almost like muscles, weren't we? Like reflexive muscles that you need to be able to dial up or dial down given what your context is. So, I mean, I don't know what you think, Zara, but I can visualize a coaching session where you're using the tensions as a template, and then you're using the profile information to help that individual understand what they do well in this area and what they might want to dial up given the situation. I'm not sure what you think, Zara.
Yeah, well, and also something that sprung to mind was that Grant. Is that Grant talking?
Yes.
Yeah. I think you mentioned skills, didn't you, there? Which strikes me as a really interesting issue in terms of the interaction between capabilities and skills and personality preferences. Because I think if when we look at the overall picture, as you were talking about, and you recognise that somebody may need to flex, to out of preference, to flex out of preference in order to get a different balance with these tensions, then if we can equip them also with some skills and capabilities to help them, on the side that it isn't a natural preference, then obviously they're going to be able to flex more easily. So I think there's a nice interaction between skill. If somebody was, a bit cautious and prefers, to stay in their comfort zone, for instance, but if we can equip them with skills, then I think it might make it easier for them to act out of preference. Is that making any sense?
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. I think once we understand our preferred approach against a model like you've got here, which is saying when we talk about things like productive paranoia, for example, and we're talking about higher emotionality and, maybe higher control or whatever that may be, for example, but you've got somebody with quite low emotionality and quite high energy and high will, and off they go, kind of like a loaded gun, and drive hard, play hard, and just keep going. The coaching conversation is just amazing at then in saying, but what are you missing here in this concept? How are you stopping, slowing down, being more reflective in order to do that? And here's some, as you say, some skills or capabilities that you might want to think about, or other members in the team that you can rely on in order to help you in that process as well. So they're not just, we know that low emotionality and higher energy, high will naturally rate themselves quite confidently about these sort of aspects. So holding them more gently and saying, well, actually, let's just check that that's right before you rush off, I think is a really powerful mechanism. So I think, and to your point, Daniel, putting structure around those with tools like Audition, not to assess in order to categorize, but to help people understand their approach and where the depth and breadth of that flex is required, is a really powerful coaching conversation, and also an organizational development opportunity to say collectively we have people who are less likely to sit in productive paranoia well against our model, but will be great at unified alignment and cohesion. Great. So let's look at how we can support that more broadly.
One thing that has just sprung to mind, I'm conscious of the time, change is anxiety inducing. Organizationally, it's stressful. Whether you experience stress or not, it's a stressful situation. And I think some of the things we've explored here bring out the fact that if you have higher emotionality, then it's a really valuable asset to have in situations like that. And I think I do so many coaching conversations with people who come in with high emotionality and they want to pull all the bad stuff out of it. But actually, you can actually start to talk about some of the factors which people are more critical about within themselves. You can actually talk about how that's a real strength. So going back to skill, it's a real skill with high emotionality to be cautious and to be to critical things, because although it doesn't feel like it for those people, quite often it's they can't switch it off. So I think there's a real positive in spin on that there as well.
I think it's about permission giving. Sorry, I think once you give something permission to celebrate that brilliance that they have and how to access that, and bringing that up and saying, did you know, or have you thought of, in this context, this is where it becomes really useful. You can see people's shoulders go down and they lift up, their chest comes out, and they go, yeah, well, actually, I've got something else to contribute. So we're improving well-being, engagement, discretionary effort, etc., etc. All of those, I think, come with that permission giving and language.
Absolutely.